For over 40 years, he was a ghost, a man who broke into homes in the dead of night, who tied up couples in their own beds, who vanished without a trace again and again across 11 California counties. Police chased him for decades. Investigators grew old and retired without ever knowing his name. And then one piece of evidence, pulled out of his own trash can, ended it all. This is the story of the Golden State Killer. It begins in the summer of 1976 in a quiet Sacramento suburb called Rancho Cordova. A man broke into a home and assaulted a woman inside. At the time, no one knew it was the beginning of anything. It looked like an isolated crime, a terrible but contained tragedy. It wasn't. Over the next 2 years, dozens more attacks followed across Sacramento and Stockton. Police started to notice a pattern. The man would stalk his victims for days before striking. He'd break into homes ahead of time, leaving twine hidden inside, material he'd later use to restrain his victims. He'd unlock windows in advance so he could slip back in undetected. At first, he targeted women who lived alone. Later, he began targeting couples. He'd tie up the male partner, then assault the woman, sometimes for hours, while eating food from their kitchen as if he had nowhere else to be. Investigators began calling him the East Area Rapist. But he didn't stop there. Between 1979 and 1986, a string of murders began happening in Southern California. 10 people killed in their own homes. For years, no one connected these killings to the rapes up north. Different counties, different task forces, no shared database. The man responsible, known by investigators as the original Night Stalker, seemed like a completely different person. He wasn't. In 2001, advances in DNA testing finally connected the dots. Crime labs confirmed that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same man. Decades of violence, finally recognized as the work of a single offender. Around 2011, true crime writer Michelle McNamara gave him the name that would stick, the Golden State Killer. So why did it take so long? Part of the answer is almost unbelievable. Back in the 1970s, the statute of limitations for rape in California was just 3 years. Once that window closed, some police departments destroyed their evidence completely. Old case files, gone. Physical evidence, gone. Decades of potential clues erased before DNA technology even existed to use them. For families of victims, the weight was unbearable. One man, Bruce Harrington, lost his brother and sister-in-law to the killer. He spent over a decade pushing California lawmakers to expand DNA testing and use it more aggressively on cold cases. He testified in front of the state assembly, practically begging officials to embrace the power of DNA. In 2016, 40 years after the first attack, the FBI and the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office offered a $50,000 reward, hoping someone, anyone, might come forward with new information. No one did. The break, when it finally came, wouldn't come from a tip. It would come from a family tree. Here's how genetic genealogy actually works. Investigators took DNA collected from old crime scenes, decades-old evidence, carefully preserved, and uploaded it to public ancestry websites, the same kind of websites millions of people use to find long-lost relatives. The DNA didn't point to a name, but it pointed to a family. By cross-referencing distant genetic matches with age, location, and family history, investigators slowly built out a family tree until one name stood out: Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer, 72 years old, living quietly in Citrus Heights, a Sacramento suburb. But a family tree isn't proof. Investigators needed his actual DNA, and they needed it without him knowing. Their first attempt, a swab from a door handle DeAngelo had touched. It wasn't conclusive. 3 days later, they tried again. This time, they collected trash from cans left outside his home. Inside, they found a tissue he'd discarded. That tissue held everything they needed. In April 2018, investigators ran the DNA from that tissue against the crime scene samples. It matched. Police surrounded DeAngelo's home in Citrus Heights. When they moved in, he didn't fight back. Dressed in a t-shirt and cargo shorts, he stepped into his yard and offered no resistance, though witnesses say he protested in a strange, high-pitched voice, "I have a roast in the oven." Inside the interrogation room, DeAngelo reportedly sat alone for nearly 2 hours, silent, staring at the walls. He was charged with 13 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances, along with 13 counts of kidnapping for robbery. In June 2020, facing the possibility of the death penalty, Joseph DeAngelo pleaded guilty to all charges. In court, he was confronted directly by the people whose lives he'd destroyed, survivors, and family members of those he'd killed. According to prosecutors, DeAngelo quietly admitted what he'd done, saying simply that he had destroyed all of their lives. A 40-year nightmare ended by a piece of trash in a can outside his own home. If you want more cold cases, finally cracked, decades later, by science, hit subscribe. A new unsolved case every week.